The scream tore from Clara Mae Morrison's throat as her father's calloused hand wrapped around her wrist, dragging her across the dusty yard toward the weathered barn that loomed against the Texas twilight like a monument to her impending imprisonment. "You will marry Silas Hargrove come Sunday, and that is final," Jeremiah Morrison bellowed, his face red with rage beneath his graying beard. The year was 1882, and in Desdemona, Texas, fathers still believed they held dominion over their daughters like cattle in a pen. "I will not," Clara shouted back, her voice hoarse but defiant. At 22 years old, she had spent her entire life bending to his will, but this was the breaking point. "I do not love him, father. He is cruel and twice my age." The barn door creaked open on protesting hinges, and Jeremiah shoved his daughter inside with such force that she stumbled, catching herself on a wooden post. The smell of hay and horse sweat filled her nostrils as she spun around, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. "Love." Her father spat the word like it was poison. "Love will not save this ranch, girl. Hargrove has money, land, and cattle. You will be his wife and you will give him sons. That is what daughters are for." "That is not what I am for," Clara said, her green eyes blazing in the dimming light. "I am not property to be sold." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "You will stay in this barn until you come to your senses. No food, no water, until you agree to do your duty to this family." "Then I will die in here," Clara said, lifting her chin despite the fear coursing through her veins. Her father studied her for a long moment, perhaps waiting for her to break, to beg for mercy. When she remained silent, he turned and walked out, slamming the heavy wooden door behind him. She heard the sound of the iron bar dropping into place, sealing her inside. Clara stood in the gathering darkness, her chest heaving with each breath. She would not cry. She had cried enough tears over the years, over her mother's death 5 years prior, over her father's increasing bitterness and cruelty, over the slow withering of any hope for happiness. Tonight, she would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. She found a relatively clean patch of hay in the corner and sank down, wrapping her arms around her knees. Through the gaps in the barn walls, she could see the last streaks of orange and purple fading from the sky. Stars began to emerge, those same stars that had witnessed countless injustices on this harsh frontier land. What her father did not know was that Clara had been planning her escape for months. She had hidden a small amount of money in a tin beneath the floorboards of her bedroom, money she had earned selling her needlework to the other women in town. She had been waiting for the right moment, and perhaps this was it. If she could somehow get out of this barn, she could run. She could take one of the horses and ride north to Fort Worth or west to El Paso. Anywhere but here. But the barn door was solid oak, reinforced with iron, and her father had the only key. The windows were too high and too small for her to squeeze through. She was well and truly trapped. Hours passed. The night grew cold, as Texas nights often did even in late spring. Clara hugged herself, shivering in her thin cotton dress. She tried to sleep but could not. Every sound made her jump, hope flickering that perhaps her father had changed his mind, but he never came. She thought about Silas Hargrove, the man her father wanted her to marry. He was 45 years old, a wealthy rancher from the next county over. He had buried 2 wives already, both died in childbirth along with their babies. He had cold gray eyes and a thin, cruel mouth. The one time Clara had met him, when he came to discuss the marriage arrangement with her father, he had looked at her the way a man might examine a horse he was thinking of purchasing. She had felt his gaze traveling over her body, assessing, calculating. It had made her skin crawl. "I would rather die," she whispered into the darkness. The night stretched on endlessly. Clara dozed fitfully, waking every time a mouse scurried through the hay or an owl hooted in the rafters. Her mouth grew dry, her stomach cramped with hunger, but worse than the physical discomfort was the crushing weight of despair. How long would her father keep her here? Days? Weeks? Would he truly let her die rather than give up his plans for this advantageous marriage? She must have finally fallen into a deeper sleep, as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the cracks in the barn walls, because she did not hear the horse approaching. She did not hear the footsteps in the yard, or the low voice speaking urgently to the animals in the corral. What woke her was the sound of splintering wood. Clara's eyes flew open, her heart hammering against her ribs. The barn door shuddered as something heavy struck it from the outside. Once, twice, 3 times. On the fourth impact, the door burst inward, the iron bar clattering to the ground, and a man stood silhouetted in the doorway, the rising sun blazing behind him. For a moment, Clara could not see his face, could only make out his tall frame, the broad shoulders, the hat on his head. Then he stepped inside and the light shifted, and she found herself looking into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. "Miss Morrison," he said, and his voice was deep and rough like gravel, but somehow gentle too. "Are you all right?" Clara scrambled to her feet, brushing hay from her skirt with trembling hands. "Who are you?" she asked, though her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. "Name's Kane Parker," he said. "I was passing through, heading north to find work. I saw your father lock you in here last night." "You saw?" Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. The humiliation of knowing a stranger had witnessed her imprisonment cut almost as deep as the act itself. "I was sleeping rough on the edge of your property," Kane explained. "Didn't mean to spy, but I heard the shouting. I came closer and saw him drag you into the barn." His jaw tightened. "I wanted to help right then, but I figured if I tried, he would just shoot me and you would still be locked up. So I waited for dawn, hoping he would be asleep." Clara's throat constricted with emotion. "You broke down the door for me. You do not even know me." Kane's blue eyes held her steadily. "I know enough," he said. "I know that locking a woman in a barn without food or water is wrong. I know that forcing someone to marry against their will is wrong. And I know that I could not just ride on and leave you here." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes, and this time she did not fight them. They spilled down her cheeks as all the fear and anger and loneliness of the long night overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she managed to say. Kane took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "We need to get you out of here before your father wakes up." "Do you have anywhere you can go?" Clara shook her head. "No family, no friends who would take me in against my father's wishes. He owns half this town and the other half is too frightened of him to cross him." "Then come with me," Kane said simply. Clara stared at him. "I cannot just ride off with a stranger." "You would rather stay here and marry a man you do not love," Kane challenged. "Or stay locked in this barn until you agree to it." He had a point. Clara looked around the barn, at the prison that had held her all night, then back at this cowboy who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even known she was praying. "Where would we go?" "I was heading to Wyoming Territory," Kane said. "I heard there is work up there on the big ranches, but we could go anywhere you like. Fort Worth, Austin, even California if you want. You would be free. Free." The word hung in the air between them like a promise, like a dream. Clara had never been free in her entire life. First, her mother had controlled her days, teaching her to cook and clean and sew, preparing her for a life as someone's wife. Then after her mother died, her father had ruled over her with an iron fist, demanding she keep house for him, cook his meals, mend his clothes, and never question his authority. "I have a little money hidden," Clara said slowly. "Not much, but some. I was saving it to run away." Kane nodded. "Then this is your chance. But we need to go now, before your father wakes." Clara made her decision in that moment, standing in the barn with hay in her hair and her dress wrinkled from sleeping on the ground. She would take this chance, this unexpected gift. "I need to get my money from the house," she said. "Too dangerous," Kane said. "If he catches you in there, this was all for nothing." "It is under the floorboards in my bedroom," Clara said. "My father sleeps like the dead. I can slip in and out without waking him." Kane studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but I am coming with you. If something goes wrong, you will need someone to help." They moved quickly and quietly across the yard. The sun was rising higher now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The main house was a simple wooden structure, weathered by the harsh Texas sun and wind. Clara eased the back door open, grateful that she had oiled the hinges just 2 days before. Kane followed her inside, his boots barely making a sound on the wooden floor. Her father's snoring echoed from his bedroom at the front of the house. Clara led Kane down the narrow hallway to her own small room. It was sparse, furnished only with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small trunk that held her few possessions. She knelt beside the bed and pried up one of the floorboards with her fingernails, revealing the small tin box she had hidden there. Inside was $37, the sum total of months of secret work. It was not a fortune, but it was something. Clara tucked the money into her bodice and replaced the floorboard. She grabbed a change of clothes from her trunk and her mother's silver locket, the only keepsake she had. They were almost to the back door when Jeremiah Morrison appeared in the hallway, still in his nightshirt, a shotgun in his hands. "I knew you would try something," he growled, raising the gun. "Step away from my daughter, Drifter, or I will blow a hole through you." Kane pushed Clara behind him, shielding her with his body. "Your daughter is a grown woman," he said calmly. "She has the right to make her own choices." "She is my property until I give her to another man in marriage," Jeremiah spat. "That is the law and the way of things. Now get out of my house before I kill you." "No," Clara said, stepping out from behind Kane. "I am not your property, father. I am not anyone's property, and I am leaving." Jeremiah's face purpled with rage. "You ungrateful wretch! After everything I have done for you, everything I have sacrificed." "Your mother would be ashamed." "My mother would be ashamed of you," Clara shot back, and the words felt like a revelation, a truth she had known deep down but never dared to speak. "She would be ashamed that you would sell your daughter to a cruel old man for money and land. She would be ashamed that you locked me in a barn like an animal. She married you for love, father, and you have forgotten what that even means." For a moment, something flickered in Jeremiah's eyes, pain, perhaps, or regret, but it was quickly replaced by cold fury. "If you walk out that door with this man, you are dead to me," he said. "You will have nothing. No family, no home, no name. You will be a whore traveling with a cowboy, and everyone will know it." The words were meant to wound, and they did, but Clara stood tall despite the hurt. "Then I will be a free whore," she said. "Better that than a captive wife." Kane took her hand, his grip strong and steady. "Come on," he said quietly. They walked out the back door together, leaving Jeremiah Morrison standing in his hallway with his shotgun and his rage. Clara did not look back. She could not afford to, not if she wanted to keep moving forward. Kane's horse was a handsome roan stallion, waiting patiently where he had been tied to the fence. "His name is Ranger," Kane said, untying the reins. "He can carry us both for a while until we can get you a horse of your own." He mounted first, then reached down to pull Clara up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, her arms wrapping around Kane's waist. She could feel the solid warmth of him, the strength in his frame. For the first time in 12 hours, she felt safe. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, leaving the Morrison ranch behind. Clara risked one glance back and saw her father standing on the porch, a small, angry figure growing smaller with every stride of the horse. Then she turned her face forward, toward the open road and whatever lay ahead. They rode in silence for the first hour, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Desdemona. The Texas landscape spread out around them, endless and beautiful in the morning light. Rolling hills covered in prairie grass, wildflowers blooming in patches of purple and yellow, the wide blue dome of the sky overhead. Finally, Kane spoke. "There is a town about 3 hours north of here called Granbury. We can stop there, get some food and water, maybe buy you a horse if they have any for sale." "I do not want to use up all my money before we even know where we are going," Clara said. "I have some money too," Kane said. "Not a lot, but enough to get by for a while. We will pool our resources, make it last as long as we can." The casual way he said, "We" made Clara's heart do something strange in her chest. This man, this stranger, had already bound his fate to hers. He had broken down a door for her, faced her father's shotgun, and now he was offering to share what little he had. She did not understand it, could not fathom why he would do all this for someone he did not know. "Why?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Why what?" Kane asked. "Why did you help me? Why are you still helping me? You could have just broken the door and left me to fend for myself. Instead, you are taking me with you, sharing your horse and your money. Why?" Kane was quiet for a moment, and Clara felt the rise and fall of his breathing against her arms. "I had a sister once," he finally said, his voice low. "Her name was Catherine. She was 2 years younger than me. When she was 18, my father arranged for her to marry a rancher from Colorado. She did not want to, but she had no choice. She begged me to help her run away, but I was too much of a coward. I told myself it was not my place to interfere, that my father knew what was best." He paused, and Clara waited, sensing there was more. "Her husband was a cruel man," Kane continued. "He beat her regularly. After 2 years of marriage, she tried to run away. He caught her on the road and dragged her back. 3 days later, she hung herself in the barn." Clara's breath caught. "Oh, Kane, I am so sorry." "I swore that day that I would never stand by and watch another woman be forced into something against her will," Kane said. "I left home, left my family, and I have been wandering ever since. Working ranches, moving from place to place. When I saw your father lock you in that barn last night, I saw Catherine, and I knew I could not let it happen again. I could not live with myself if I did." Clara tightened her arms around him, pressing her cheek against his back. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being brave this time." They rode on, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. By mid-morning, Clara's throat was parched and her stomach ached with hunger. She had not eaten since yesterday's lunch, had not had water since yesterday evening. Kane must have noticed her discomfort because he pulled Ranger to a stop beside a small creek that trickled through a grove of cottonwood trees. "Let us rest here for a bit," he said, dismounting and then helping Clara down. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet hit the ground. Kane's hand steadied her, warm and strong on her waist. "Thank you," she said, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, of the way his blue eyes seemed to see right through her. "Drink your fill," Kane said, stepping back and gesturing toward the creek. "The water looks clean enough." Clara knelt by the stream and cupped her hands, bringing the cool water to her lips. It tasted like heaven, like life itself. She drank until her stomach sloshed, then sat back on her heels, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Kane drank too, then pulled some dried beef and hardtack from his saddlebag. It was not much of a meal, but Clara ate it gratefully, savoring every bite. They sat in the shade of the cottonwoods, listening to the burble of the creek and the whisper of wind through the leaves. "Tell me about yourself," Kane said after a while. "All I know is your name and that you have a terrible father. What else should I know about Clara Mae Morrison?" Clara considered the question. "There is not much to tell," she said. "I have lived in Desdemona my whole life. My mother taught me to read and write, which was unusual for a ranch girl. She had been a school teacher before she married my father. After she died, I took over running the household. Cooking, cleaning, mending, that has been my life." "What do you dream about?" Kane asked. When you let yourself dream, no one had ever asked her that before. Clara looked out at the prairie, at the endless horizon. "I dream about having a choice," she said slowly. "About waking up in the morning and deciding for myself what I will do with my day. I dream about going to places I have only read about in books. Cities with buildings taller than trees, oceans that stretch to the end of the world. I dream about mattering, about being more than just someone's daughter or someone's wife." Kane nodded slowly. "Those are good dreams," he said. "And now maybe you can make them real." "Maybe," Clara said, though she still felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. "But first I need to survive. I need to figure out how to make a living, how to build a life. I can cook and clean and sew, but that will only get me work as a servant or a seamstress. And if my father spreads word about me running off with a cowboy, no respectable family will hire me anyway." "Then we will go somewhere your father's words cannot reach," Kane said. "Somewhere far enough away that you can start fresh." "We," Clara said, testing the word on her tongue. "You keep saying we, but surely you have your own plans, your own life to live. You cannot mean to tie yourself to me indefinitely." Kane looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. "I do not feel tied," he said quietly. "I feel like maybe, for the first time in years, I am doing exactly what I am supposed to be doing." Before Clara could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the prairie. Both of them jumped to their feet, Kane's hand going instinctively to the revolver at his hip. 3 riders appeared on the horizon, heading in their direction. "Could be anyone," Kane said, but Clara could hear the tension in his voice. "Stay behind me, just in case." As the riders drew closer, Clara's heart sank. She recognized the lead rider's black hat and distinctive silver saddle. It was Vernon Polk, one of her father's ranch hands, a mean-spirited man who did Jeremiah's dirty work without question. The 2 men with him were equally rough characters. "There she is," Vernon shouted, spurring his horse to a gallop. "The boss wants you home, Miss Morrison." "I am not going back," Clara called out, trying to keep her voice steady. Vernon and his companions pulled up a few yards away, their horses stamping and snorting. "That is not really up to you," Vernon said, his hand resting on his gun. "Your daddy says you come home, so you come home. Now get on my horse before this gets ugly." "The lady said she is not going," Kane said, his voice hard as iron. His hand hovered near his revolver, ready. Vernon's eyes narrowed as he took in Kane, assessing the threat. "This does not concern you, Drifter. This is family business." "She is coming with me," Kane said. "And you 3 are going to turn around and ride back to Desdemona." One of the other men laughed. "Big talk from a saddled tramp with 1 gun facing 3 of us." "Odds do not bother me much," Kane said calmly. "Question is, which one of you wants to die first?" The certainty in his voice gave the men pause. Vernon's hand twitched near his gun, and for a terrible moment, Clara thought violence was inevitable. Then Vernon seemed to reconsider, perhaps recognizing that even if they won the fight, someone would likely end up dead. "Your daddy is not going to let this go," Vernon said to Clara. "He will hunt you to the ends of the earth if he has to." "Then let him try," Clara said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I am not his property any more." Vernon spat in the dust. "You are making a mistake, girl. That drifter is going to use you up and leave you in some gutter somewhere. Then you will come crawling back, and your daddy will not take you in." "Better a gutter than a marriage to Silas Hargrove," Clara said. Vernon's face darkened, but he yanked his horse's reins around. "Come on," he growled to his companions. "Let them go. When the girl ends up dead in a ditch somewhere, it will not be on our heads." The three men rode off, though Vernon looked back once with an expression of such malice that Clara shivered. Kane kept his hand near his gun until they were completely out of sight. "We need to keep moving," he said. "If they report back to your father, he might come himself next time or send more men." They mounted Ranger again and rode hard for the next 2 hours, pushing the horse as fast as they dared without exhausting him. By the time they reached Granbury, both Clara and Kane were dusty, tired, and on edge. Granbury was a small town, but it had the essentials: a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a livery stable. Kane headed straight for the livery, hoping to buy or trade for a second horse. The stableman, a grizzled old-timer named Hank, had a mare for sale, a dappled gray with gentle eyes. "She is older but sound," Hank said, running a hand along the mare's flank. "I will take $25 for her, tack included." Kane glanced at Clara, who nodded. It was a significant portion of their combined funds, but they needed the horse. Kane counted out the money while Clara got acquainted with the mare, running her hands along the horse's neck, murmuring softly. "What will you name her?" Kane asked as they led the mare outside. "Grace," Clara said without hesitation. "Because she represents a kind of grace I never expected to receive." They bought supplies at the general store: more food, a bedroll for Clara, a canteen, a few basic necessities. The proprietor's wife, a plump woman with kind eyes, noticed Clara's disheveled appearance and quietly sold her a split riding skirt and a spare blouse at a generous discount. Clara changed in the back room, grateful to be out of her wrinkled dress. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Kane led them out of town, heading west. "We will make camp away from the main road tonight," he said, "just in case anyone comes looking." They found a good spot in a small canyon, sheltered by rocks on 3 sides with a view of the surrounding prairie. Kane built a fire while Clara unpacked their supplies. They cooked beans and bacon in Kane's small skillet and ate as the stars began to emerge overhead. "Tomorrow we should decide on a destination," Kane said, poking at the fire with a stick. "We cannot just keep riding aimlessly. We need a plan." Clara considered this. "What about San Antonio?" she suggested. "It is a big city, big enough that we could disappear. And I have heard there are opportunities there for people willing to work." Kane nodded thoughtfully. "San Antonio is a good choice. It is about a week's ride from here, maybe less if we push hard, and it is far enough from Desdemona that your father's reach might not extend that far." "Then San Antonio it is," Clara said, feeling a flutter of excitement beneath her exhaustion. San Antonio. She had never been anywhere larger than Fort Worth, had never seen a real city. The prospect was both terrifying and thrilling. They fell silent, both lost in their own thoughts. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. Clara found herself studying Kane in the flickering light, noting the strong lines of his face, the way the firelight caught in his dark hair. He was handsome, she realized, though that was perhaps the least important thing about him. What mattered more was the way he had stood up for her, the way he made her feel safe, the gentle steadiness of his presence. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said, breaking the silence. "Of course," Kane replied, looking up from the fire. "Why have you never settled anywhere? Why keep wandering from place to place?" Kane was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "After my sister died, I could not stay at home," he said. "Everything reminded me of her, of my failure to help her. My parents blamed me too, I think, though they never said it outright. So I left and I started moving. At first I thought I was running from the guilt, but after a while I realized I was also searching for something." "Searching for what?" Clara asked softly. "I did not know," Kane said. "A purpose, maybe, a reason to stop running, a place where I belonged." He looked at her then, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "But in the last day I have started to wonder if maybe I have been searching for a person, not a place." Clara's breath caught. The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility, with words unspoken. She wanted to ask him what he meant, to hear him say it plainly, but she was also afraid. Afraid that she was reading too much into his words, afraid of what it would mean if she was not. "You should get some rest," Kane said, looking away and breaking the moment. "We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." Clara nodded, though she felt strangely disappointed. She spread out her new bedroll on the opposite side of the fire from Kane's and lay down, using her bundled-up dress as a pillow. The ground was hard, and the night sounds of the prairie were unfamiliar and somewhat unnerving. She could hear coyotes yipping in the distance, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. "Clara," Kane's voice came from across the fire. "Yes. I want you to know that you are safe with me. I will never hurt you, never take advantage. You have my word on that." Warmth flooded through Clara's chest. "I know," she said. "I trust you, Kane." She did trust him, she realized with some surprise. After knowing him for less than a day, she trusted this cowboy more than she had ever trusted her own father. Perhaps it was foolish, perhaps she would regret it. But in this moment, lying under the vast Texas sky with Kane Parker keeping watch over the fire, Clara felt safer than she had in years. Sleep came slowly, but when it came, it was deep and dreamless. They rose with the dawn and set out, riding west and south toward San Antonio. The days fell into a rhythm. Wake early, ride until mid-morning, rest during the hottest part of the day, ride again in the late afternoon and early evening, make camp as darkness fell. They talked while they rode, sharing stories from their lives, their hopes and fears, their observations about the landscape around them. Clara learned that Kane had been born in Missouri, that he had 2 brothers in addition to his late sister, that his favorite food was apple pie, and he had a deep aversion to turnips. He had worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, a deputy for a short stint in New Mexico, and once even as a cook on a cattle drive, though he swore he was terrible at it. Kane learned that Clara had taught herself French from a book her mother had owned, that she was afraid of snakes but not spiders, that she could play the piano though she had not touched one in years. He learned that she had a sharp wit and a quiet strength, that she was more educated than most men he had met, and that when she smiled, truly smiled, it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. On the 3rd day of their journey, they stopped at a small creek to water the horses and refill their canteens. Clara knelt by the water's edge, splashing the cool liquid on her face and neck. The Texas sun was merciless, even in late May, and she could feel the heat prickling her skin despite the wide-brimmed hat Kane had bought for her in Granbury. "You are getting sunburned," Kane observed, kneeling beside her. "I am not used to being outside this much," Clara admitted. "At home, I spent most of my time indoors." Kane reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small tin. "This is lanolin salve," he said. "It is meant for horses, but it works on people too. It will help with the burn and prevent it from getting worse." Clara took the tin and opened it, wrinkling her nose at the smell. "It is terrible," she said, but she rubbed some on her face and neck anyway. Kane laughed, a sound that Clara was learning to treasure. He did not laugh often, but when he did, it transformed his whole face, softening the hard edges the frontier had carved into him. "Beauty comes at a price," he teased. "I have never much cared about beauty anyway," Clara said, closing the tin and handing it back. "My mother used to say that beauty fades but character endures." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman," Kane said. "She was," Clara agreed. "I wish you could have met her. I think she would have liked you." "And I think I would have liked her," Kane said. "Any woman who raised a daughter as brave and smart as you must have been extraordinary." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, and this time it had nothing to do with the sun. She was not accustomed to compliments, especially not sincere ones. Her father had never praised her, and the few young men who had courted her over the years had offered only superficial flattery about her appearance. "I am not brave," she said quietly. "I am terrified most of the time." "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Kane said. "It is acting despite the fear. You stood up to your father, you chose freedom over security, you rode away from the only life you had ever known. That is the definition of bravery, Clara." She looked at him, this cowboy who had become her protector, her companion, her friend. And she realized with a jolt that her feelings for him had already grown beyond friendship. Somewhere between Desdemona and here, between the barn door breaking and the long rides and the conversations by the campfire, she had started to fall in love with Kane Parker. The realization both exhilarated and terrified her. She had sworn she would never let herself be dependent on a man, would never give anyone that kind of power over her. And yet here she was, her heart racing every time Kane looked at her, her spirits lifting every time he smiled. What would happen when they reached San Antonio? Would they go their separate ways, each pursuing their own path? The thought made her chest ache. "We should keep moving," Kane said, standing and offering her his hand. Clara took it, letting him pull her to her feet. His hand was rough with calluses, warm and strong. He held on for just a moment longer than necessary before releasing her. They mounted their horses and rode on. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled south, the rolling hills giving way to flatter terrain, dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. They passed through small settlements, though they avoided staying in any of them, preferring to camp on open ground where they could see anyone approaching. On the fifth night, as they sat by their campfire eating beans and cornbread that Clara had made in Kane's skillet, a sudden rainstorm blew in from the west. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a matter of minutes, and the rain came down in sheets, instantly drenching them and threatening to drown the fire. "We need shelter," Kane shouted over the roar of the rain. He grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her toward a rocky overhang they had noticed earlier. They huddled beneath it, shivering as the storm raged. The horses stood with their backs to the wind, heads lowered, enduring the onslaught with stoic patience. The overhang was small, barely large enough for both of them. They pressed close together for warmth, and Clara could feel Kane's heart beating against her back as he wrapped his arms around her. She told herself it was just for warmth, that it meant nothing more than survival. But her body responded anyway, every nerve ending aware of his proximity, of the strength of his arms, of the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Are you all right?" Kane asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," Clara managed to say, though she was trembling and not entirely from the cold. The storm lasted for nearly an hour. When it finally passed, leaving the prairie soaked and glistening in the moonlight, they ventured back out to check on the horses and salvage what they could of their camp. The fire was dead, drowned by the rain, and their bedrolls were soaked through. "We are not going to be sleeping much tonight," Kane said ruefully, wringing water from his blanket. They spent the miserable night huddled under the overhang, taking turns trying to doze while the other kept watch. By the time dawn broke, they were both exhausted and stiff, but at least the sun was shining again, offering hope that their gear would dry. "Only a few more days to San Antonio," Kane said as they saddled the horses. "We can get a hotel room there, sleep in real beds, eat food we did not cook over a campfire." "That sounds like paradise," Clara said, though part of her felt a pang of sadness at the thought. These nights under the stars with Kane, as uncomfortable as they sometimes were, had also been magical in their own way. Once they reached San Antonio, reality would intrude. They would have to find work, establish themselves, figure out how to survive in a city. And they would have to decide what they were to each other. The thought occupied Clara's mind as they rode. She found herself stealing glances at Kane, wondering what he was thinking, whether he felt the same pull she did. Sometimes she caught him looking at her too, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. But neither of them spoke of it. On the 7th day, as the sun climbed toward noon, they crested a hill and saw San Antonio spread out before them in the valley below. It was bigger than Clara had imagined, a sprawl of buildings clustered around the winding San Antonio River. Church steeples reached toward the sky, and she could make out the distinctive shape of the Alamo, the old mission that had been the site of the famous battle 46 years earlier. "We made it," Clara breathed, a mixture of relief and anxiety washing over her. They rode down into the city, joining the flow of traffic on the main roads. The noise and bustle were overwhelming after a week of open prairie. Wagons rumbled past, merchants called out their wares, children darted between the buildings. The air smelled of horse manure, wood smoke, cooking food, and humanity pressed close together. Kane led them to a modest hotel on the edge of the commercial district. The proprietor, a heavy-set German man named Mueller, quoted them a price for 2 rooms that made Kane wince. "We will take 1 room," Clara said before she could think better of it. "With 2 beds," she added quickly. Mueller's eyebrows rose, but he did not comment. He took their money and handed Kane a key. "2nd floor, end of the hall. No cooking in the rooms, no loud noise after 10 o'clock." The room was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds separated by a nightstand, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a single window that looked out over the street. Clara sank onto one of the beds with a sigh of relief. It was not luxurious, but after a week of sleeping on the ground, it felt like the finest hotel in the world. "I am going to stable the horses," Kane said. "You rest. We can figure out our next steps after we have both had a chance to clean up and sleep properly." After he left, Clara stripped off her dusty clothes and washed herself with water from the basin. She put on her one clean dress, a simple blue cotton that her mother had made for her years ago. Then she lay down on the bed and fell asleep almost instantly, her body finally succumbing to the exhaustion of the journey. When she woke, the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. Kane was sitting in the chair by the window, watching the street below. He had cleaned up too, his hair still damp, his face freshly shaved. Without the stubble, he looked younger, more vulnerable somehow. "How long did I sleep?" Clara asked, sitting up and pushing her hair out of her face. "About 4 hours," Kane said. "I came back and you were dead to the world." "I did not want to wake you." Clara's stomach growled audibly and Kane laughed. "Come on," he said. "Let us get some real food. There is a restaurant downstairs that Mueller recommended." The restaurant was crowded and noisy, but the food was good. Beefsteak, potatoes, green beans, fresh bread with butter. Clara ate until she thought she might burst, savoring every bite. Kane ate with equal enthusiasm, and they grinned at each other across the table like conspirators. After dinner, they walked along the river, enjoying the cool evening air. Other couples strolled the paths as well, and Clara realized with a start that they probably looked like a couple too. The thought sent a flutter through her stomach. "Tomorrow we should start looking for work," Kane said. "I can probably find something on one of the ranches outside of town. You could look for work as a seamstress, or maybe in one of the hotels or restaurants. Or we could pool our resources and start a business," Clara suggested, surprising herself with the boldness of the idea. "I can cook and sew. You know about horses and cattle. Maybe we could open a boarding house or a livery stable or something." Kane stopped walking and turned to look at her. "Together?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that made Clara's heart race. "Yes, together," Clara said, meeting his gaze. "Unless you were planning to leave once we got here. I know we never really discussed what would happen after San Antonio." "I was not planning to leave," Kane said quietly. "I was just not sure what you wanted. I did not want to presume." Clara took a breath, gathering her courage. "Kane, in the week we have been traveling together, I have come to care for you. Deeply. I know it is fast and may be foolish and you might not feel the same way, but I needed to tell you." For a moment, Kane just stared at her and Clara's heart sank. She had misread the situation, had let her feelings run away with her. But then Kane stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I feel the same way," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been trying to tell myself that it was too soon, that I was taking advantage of the situation. But Clara, from the moment I saw you in that barn, something in me shifted. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more in love with you." Clara's breath left her in a rush. "You love me?" "I do," Kane said simply. "I love you, Clara Mae Morrison. And if you will have me, I would like to build a life with you, not as your protector or your employer or your friend, but as your husband." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will have you. I love you too, Kane." He kissed her then, his lips gentle on hers, and Clara felt like she was falling and flying all at once. This was nothing like the stolen kiss that Billy Thompson had forced on her behind the church when she was 16. This was tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, grinning like fools. "We should probably wait a respectable amount of time before we actually get married," Kane said. "I do not want people thinking I kidnapped you and forced you into it." "Let them think what they like," Clara said. "But yes, we can wait a little while. Get established here, make sure this is really what we both want." "I already know it is what I want," Kane said, pulling her close again. "But I understand the need for caution. We will do this right." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, their future suddenly bright with possibility. That night, they slept in their separate beds, but the knowledge that they had found each other, that they had chosen each other, filled the small room with warmth. The next morning, they set out to explore their options in San Antonio. The city was full of opportunities for those willing to work hard. Kane found work almost immediately at a livery stable on the edge of town. The owner, a man named Garrett with a gruff manner but a kind heart, was impressed by Kane's knowledge of horses and hired him on the spot. Clara had a harder time. Many of the respectable establishments would not hire a single woman without references, and Clara obviously could not provide any. But finally, she found work at a small restaurant owned by a Mexican couple, the Rodriguezes. Senora Rodriguez was skeptical at first, but when Clara demonstrated her cooking skills, preparing a perfect batch of biscuits and a savory beef stew, she was hired. For the next 3 months, they worked hard and saved their money. Kane proved invaluable at the livery, and Garrett gave him a raise after just a month. Clara became Senora Rodriguez's right hand in the kitchen, and the restaurant's business improved as word spread about the delicious food. They continued to share the hotel room, though they were scrupulously proper, maintaining separate beds. But every evening they would sit together by the window, talking about their day, making plans for the future. And sometimes, when the longing became too much, they would kiss, careful to keep their passion in check until they were properly married. It was during this time that they learned San Antonio was a city of diverse cultures and backgrounds. Anglo settlers mixed with Mexican families who had lived there for generations, German immigrants, freed slaves building new lives, and various other people seeking opportunity on the frontier. Clara found she loved the vibrancy of it, so different from the insular world of Desdemona. One evening in August, 3 months after their arrival, Kane came back to the hotel with news. "Garrett is selling the livery," he said. "His health is failing and he wants to move to Austin to live with his daughter." "That is sad," Clara said. "He is a good man." "He wants to sell it to me," Kane continued. "He said he has watched how I work, how I treat the animals and the customers, and he thinks I would run it well. He is asking $500, which is far less than it is worth. He said he would rather it go to someone he trusts than get top dollar from a stranger." Clara's mind raced. "Do we have that much saved?" "Between the two of us, we have about $350, Kane said. "We would need to borrow the rest." "The bank might give us a loan if we have a solid business plan," Clara said, her excitement growing. "And if we owned the livery, we would have a steady income. We could build something real, Kane." They spent the next week preparing their proposal. Clara drew up detailed financial projections, listing their expenses and projected income. Kane outlined his plans for improving the business, including expanding the boarding services and possibly adding a small smithy for horseshoeing. The bank manager, a serious man named Whitmore, listened to their pitch with a skeptical expression. But when he reviewed their numbers and saw their savings, his attitude shifted. "You have thought this through carefully," he said. "And Garrett is a respected member of the community. If he is willing to sell to you at that price, he must believe in you. I can offer you a loan for $150 at 8% interest, to be repaid over 3 years. They accepted the terms and shook hands. Within a week, the livery stable belonged to Kane Parker, with Clara as his business partner. They renamed it Parker and Morrison Livery, and Clara insisted on painting a sign herself, carefully lettering each word. The night after the sale was finalized, Kane took Clara to dinner at the finest restaurant in San Antonio. Over roast chicken and wine, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I know we said we would wait," he said, "but I think we have waited long enough. I want to marry you, Clara." "Not someday, but soon as we can arrange it." Clara's heart soared. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want to marry you too." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Catholic Church, despite neither of them being particularly religious. Senora Rodriguez stood as Clara's witness, and Garrett stood for Kane. Clara wore a new dress she had sewn herself, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored linen. Kane wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with love as Clara walked down the aisle toward him. The priest, Father Miguel, conducted the ceremony in a mixture of English and Spanish. When it came time for the vows, Clara's voice shook with emotion but never wavered. "I, Clara Mae Morrison, take you, Kane James Parker, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand by you through whatever life brings. You saved me when I needed saving, and now I choose to build a life with you, not out of obligation or necessity, but because I love you with my whole heart." Kane's vows were equally heartfelt. I, Kane James Parker, take you, Clara Mae Morrison, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and always see you as my equal partner. You gave me a purpose when I was lost, and now I choose to spend every day of my life making you happy, because your happiness is mine. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Kane kissed Clara with such tenderness that Senora Rodriguez wept openly. Garrett clapped Kane on the back and pressed a silver dollar into his hand, for luck. That night, in a room at a nicer hotel than the one they had been staying at, Clara and Kane finally consummated their marriage. It was both awkward and beautiful, tender and passionate. Clara had been nervous, knowing little of what to expect, but Kane was patient and gentle, and by the time the night was over, she felt like she had discovered a whole new dimension of love. They spent 3 days in that hotel, seldom leaving the room except for meals, learning each other's bodies and hearts. On the 4th day, they returned to reality and to work, but now as husband and wife. They moved into a small house behind the livery, a 2-room structure that had come with the property. It was modest but theirs, and Clara set about making it a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted flowers in the small yard, and filled the rooms with the smell of fresh bread and cooking. The livery prospered under Kane's management. He had a gift for working with difficult horses, and word spread that if you had a horse with problems, Kane Parker could fix it. Clara managed the books and the customer accounts, her neat handwriting and mathematical skills proving invaluable. For nearly a year, they lived in peaceful happiness, building their business and their life together. Clara discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1883, and they were both overjoyed. Kane became impossibly protective, insisting she rest more and work less. Clara humored him, even though she felt perfectly healthy, but their peace was shattered one afternoon in June when 3 men rode into town. Clara was in the house, working on a baby quilt, when she heard Kane's voice raised in anger. She hurried to the window and felt her blood run cold. The men were Vernon Polk and 2 of the ranch hands who had confronted them a year earlier near Granbury. And with them, sitting tall in his saddle, was Jeremiah Morrison. Clara's hands shook as she watched Kane face down the 4 men. She could not hear what they were saying, but she could see the fury in her father's face, the tension in Kane's stance. She grabbed her shawl and hurried outside, her mind racing. She had known this confrontation might come someday, but she had hoped that enough time had passed, that her father had given up and moved on. "Father," she said as she approached, keeping her voice steady, "what are you doing here?" Jeremiah's eyes raked over her, taking in the swell of her belly beneath her dress, his face purpled with rage. "You are with child," he spat, "carrying the bastard of this drifter." "I am carrying the child of my husband," Clara corrected, moving to stand beside Kane. "Kane and I were married almost a year ago." "Married?" Jeremiah scoffed. "Without my permission, without a proper courtship. This is not a marriage, it is an abomination." "This is our life and you have no say in it," Clara said. "I am sorry if my choices have hurt you, Father, but I will not apologize for choosing freedom and love over bondage and misery." "You think you are free?" Jeremiah laughed bitterly. "You are a fool, girl. You have traded a life of comfort and security for a hardscrabble existence with a nobody. When this cowboy tires of you, when the business fails and you are left with nothing, do not come crawling back to me." "I will not," Clara said, "because Kane will never tire of me and our business will not fail. We have built something real here, something based on mutual respect and love." "You cannot understand that because you have never loved anything except money and land." Jeremiah flinched as if she had struck him. For a moment, Something almost like pain flickered in his eyes. "Your mother would be ashamed of you," he said quietly. "No," Clara said, tears streaming down her face now. "My mother would be proud of me for having the courage to choose my own path, and she would be disappointed in you for trying to sell me like cattle." Jeremiah stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You are dead to me," he said. "From this day forward, you are no daughter of mine." "I stopped being your daughter the night you locked me in that barn," Clara said. Jeremiah yanked his horse's reins, turning the animal sharply. "Let us go," he said to his men. "This place stinks of failure and foolishness." They rode away, and Clara sagged against Kane, her legs suddenly weak. He held her close, his arms strong and steady around her. "I am so sorry," Kane murmured into her hair. "I am sorry he found us, sorry you had to face that." "Do not be sorry," Clara said, wiping her eyes. "This needed to happen. I needed to stand up to him one final time to make it clear that I have chosen my life and I do not regret it." "Do you regret it?" Kane asked quietly. "Any of it?" Clara pulled back to look him in the eyes. "Not for a single moment," she said. "I love you, Kane Parker. I love the life we have built together. And I cannot wait to bring our child into this world and raise him or her with all the love and freedom we never had." Kane kissed her then, long and deep, unconcerned about who might see. When they finally pulled apart, Clara noticed several of their neighbors watching from across the street. But instead of disapproval, she saw smiles and nods of approval. Senora Rodriguez came hurrying over, her face full of concern. "Clara, Querida, are you all right?" "We saw those men," saw the angry words. "I am fine," Clara assured her. "It was just my father finally accepting that I am beyond his control." "Good riddance to him then," Senora Rodriguez said firmly. "You have a family here now, people who love and value you. That man, he does not deserve you." Over the following months, Clara felt those words prove true. The community of San Antonio, this diverse and vibrant city, embraced them as their own. When Clara went into labor in late November, Senora Rodriguez and two other neighbor women attended her, while Kane paced anxiously outside the bedroom. The labor was long and difficult, nearly 20 hours of pain and struggle. But finally, as dawn broke on a chilly November morning, Clara's cries gave way to a different sound, the wailing of a newborn baby. Senora Rodriguez emerged from the bedroom, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son," she told Kane. "A healthy, strong boy, and Clara, she did wonderfully. She is tired but well." Kane rushed into the room to find Clara propped up against pillows, sweaty and exhausted but radiant with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she pulled back the blanket, Kane saw his son for the first time. The baby had Clara's dark hair and what looked like it might be Kane's blue eyes. His little fists waved in the air as he cried, protesting his sudden arrival into the world. "He is perfect," Kane breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You are perfect. I love you so much, Clara." "I love you too," Clara said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Look what we made, Kane. Look at this beautiful little person we created together." They named him James Morrison Parker, honoring Kane's middle name and Clara's maiden name. The baptism was held at Father Miguel's church 2 weeks later, with half the neighborhood in attendance. Senora Rodriguez and Garrett stood as godparents, promising to help guide the child in faith and life. As Clara stood in the church, her baby in her arms and her husband at her side, surrounded by friends who had become family, she thought back to that night in the barn. If someone had told her then that in less than 2 years she would be here, married to a good man with a thriving business and a beautiful son, she would not have believed it. But it was real. All of it was gloriously, impossibly real. The years that followed were full and happy. The livery continued to prosper, and they eventually expanded it to include the smithy Kane had dreamed of. Kane hired 2 employees to help with the workload, giving him more time to spend with his growing family. James was followed by a daughter, Catherine, born in 1885. They named her after Kane's sister, hoping to honor her memory by giving her name to a child who would grow up free and loved. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Samuel. Clara discovered she had a talent for managing the business side of things, and she began taking on additional ventures. She bought a small building near the restaurant where she had once worked and opened a boarding house. It was always full, primarily with people new to San Antonio who needed a clean, affordable place to stay while they got established. Kane became known as one of the finest horse trainers in South Texas. People brought him animals from as far away as Houston and Austin, seeking his expertise. He never turned away a horse or a customer, treating each one with the same patience and respect. They prospered, not just financially but in every way that mattered. Their children grew healthy and strong, educated at the local school and loved fiercely by both parents. Clara taught them to read and write, to think independently, to question authority when necessary. Kane taught them about horses and hard work, about integrity and keeping one's word. Sometimes, late at night after the children were asleep, Kane and Clara would sit on the porch of their house, which they had expanded over the years into a comfortable home with 4 bedrooms and a real kitchen. They would hold hands and watch the stars, marveling at how far they had come. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been sleeping on your property that night?" Kane asked one evening. Clara considered the question. "I think I would have found a way to escape eventually," she said, "but it would have been harder, lonelier. I might not have survived it." "I think you would have," Kane said. "You are the strongest person I know, Clara. You would have found a way." "Maybe," Clara allowed, "but I am glad I did not have to find out. I am glad you were there that night, that you were brave enough to break down that door." "Best decision I ever made," Kane said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. They never heard from Jeremiah Morrison again. Clara sometimes wondered what had become of him, whether he had finally married her off to Silas Hargrove, or found some other way to consolidate his land and power. But she did not dwell on it. The past was past, and she was too busy building her future to worry about the man who had tried to destroy it. In 1890, when James was 5 and Catherine 3, Clara received a letter that had been forwarded through several addresses before finally reaching her. It was from a lawyer in Desdemona, informing her that Jeremiah Morrison had died of a heart attack. The letter went on to explain that in his will, Jeremiah had left everything to Silas Hargrove, with one exception: a small parcel of land on the edge of the Morrison property, which he left to his daughter Clara, should she still be alive. Clara stared at the letter for a long time, trying to decipher her father's final message. Was it an apology? An acknowledgement that she was still his daughter, despite everything? Or was it simply a formality, the smallest possible concession to avoid the appearance of complete heartlessness? She would never know, but she also realized it did not matter. She did not need her father's land or his belated recognition. She had built her own life, created her own legacy. "What do you want to do with it?" Kane asked when she showed him the letter. Clara thought for a moment. "Sell it," she said. "Use the money to expand the boarding house or invest in the children's education. That land is part of a past I do not want to return to." And so she did, selling the parcel to a neighboring rancher for a fair price and investing the money in their future. It felt like closing a circle, like putting the final piece of the past to rest. By 1895, the Parker family was well established in San Antonio society. They were not wealthy by the standards of the old Spanish families or the new Anglo-industrialists, but they were comfortable and respected. Their businesses thrived, their children flourished, and their love for each other only deepened with time. James, at 12 years old, showed an aptitude for numbers and business like his mother. Catherine, at 10, was horse-mad like her father, spending every spare moment in the livery. Samuel, at 8, was the dreamer of the family, always drawing pictures or making up stories. Clara sometimes thought about writing down her own story, the tale of how a cowboy had broken down a barn door at dawn and changed her life forever. But she was too busy living the sequel to dwell on the beginning. One evening in late spring, as the whole family gathered for dinner around the big table Kane had built, Clara looked at each beloved face and felt her heart swell with gratitude. Kane at the head of the table, his dark hair now touched with gray but his blue eyes as bright as ever. James, serious and thoughtful, already talking about wanting to go to university someday. Catherine, vibrant and energetic, recounting some adventure she had had with a difficult mare. Samuel, quietly sketching on a scrap of paper while he ate. This was her life. Not the life her father had planned for her, not the life society expected of her, but the life she had chosen. The life she and Kane had built together, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. After dinner, after the children had been sent to wash up and get ready for bed, Kane pulled Clara aside. "Come with me," he said mysteriously. He led her out to the livery, to the small office where they kept their records and accounts. On the desk was a wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. "I made this for you," Kane said. "Well, I had Miguel Rodriguez carve it. You know I am terrible at fine detail work, but I wanted to give you something to mark our 13th year of marriage." Clara opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a thick stack of papers, bound with a ribbon. She pulled them out and realized they were land deeds. "I bought the property next to ours," Kane explained. 10 acres. "I thought we could build a bigger house there, something with room for the children to grow, and maybe grandchildren someday. And I thought you might want to plant a garden, a real one, with all those flowers and vegetables you are always talking about." Clara stared at the deeds, then at Kane, then back at the deeds. "You bought us land," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I bought us a future," Kane corrected gently. "A place to put down roots even deeper than we already have, a legacy to pass on to our children." Clara set the deeds down and threw her arms around her husband, holding him tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "For this, for everything, for choosing me that morning at the barn." "I did not choose you," Kane said, holding her just as tightly. "I found you. And finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood there in the livery office, holding each other as the evening deepened into night. Through the window, they could see the lights of San Antonio twinkling to life, and beyond them, the vast Texas sky filled with stars. In the years that followed, they built that house on the new land. It was a sprawling, comfortable home with a wide porch perfect for sitting on summer evenings. Clara planted her garden, and it became famous in the neighborhood for its beauty and bounty. She grew vegetables that she shared with their employees and neighbors, and flowers that she arranged in vases throughout the house. The children grew into young adults. James went to university in Austin, studying business and law. He returned to San Antonio and became a successful attorney, but he never forgot his roots. He married a schoolteacher named Margaret, and they gave Clara and Kane their first grandchildren. Catherine never lost her love of horses. She shocked polite society by refusing to marry young, instead working alongside her father in the livery, and eventually taking over much of the day-to-day management. She finally married at 28 to a veterinarian who shared her passion for animals. Together, they expanded the business to include animal medical services. Samuel pursued his artistic talents, studying at an art school in New York before returning to Texas. He became a respected painter, known for his portraits and landscapes of frontier life. He married a poet, and their home was always full of artists and writers and thinkers. Clara and Kane watched their children flourish with pride and joy, knowing they had broken the cycle of control and cruelty that had marked Clara's own childhood. They had given their children what they had fought so hard to claim for themselves, the freedom to choose their own paths. In 1910, as they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary, Kane and Clara took a trip back to Desdemona. It was the first time Clara had returned since the day they fled, and she felt strange and disconnected as they rode through the town. So much had changed. The town had grown, new businesses had sprung up, old ones had closed. The Morrison ranch was now owned by someone else, the house rebuilt after a fire had destroyed the original structure. The barn where Clara had been imprisoned was gone, torn down years ago. They rode out to a small cemetery on the edge of town, where Clara's mother was buried. Clara knelt by the grave and placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the headstone. "Hello, Mama," she said softly. "I am sorry I have not visited before now. I want you to know that I am happy. I married a good man, a man who loves and respects me. We have 3 beautiful children and 4 grandchildren so far. I run my own businesses. I make my own choices. I am free, Mama, in all the ways you never were. And I hope, that would make you proud." Kane stood a respectful distance away, giving her privacy for this moment. When Clara stood and brushed the dirt from her skirt, he came to her side and took her hand. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said, and she meant it. "I needed to come back to see that the past is truly past. This place does not have any power over me anymore." They left Desdemona that same day, riding back toward San Antonio and the life they had built together. As they traveled, Clara thought about that night in the barn, about the girl she had been then, frightened and angry and desperate. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that help was coming at dawn, that a future full of love and purpose was waiting just on the other side of that broken door. But she could not go back. She could only move forward, grateful for every day, every moment, every choice that had led her to this life. Kane seemed to sense her thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" he asked as they rode side by side. "About how lucky I am," Clara said. "About how one act of courage, one broken door, changed everything." "2 acts of courage," Kane corrected. "I may have broken the door, but you had the courage to walk through it, to leave everything you knew behind and trust a stranger." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Clara said. "So would I," Kane replied. They rode on as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple. Ahead lay San Antonio, their home, their family, their future. Behind lay the past, finally laid to rest. Clara and Kane Parker lived long, full lives. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held in the garden Clara had planted years before, now mature and lush, a testament to what could grow when given care and freedom. Kane died peacefully in his sleep in 1935 at the age of 78. Clara held his hand as he drew his last breath, and though her heart broke at losing him, she also felt gratitude for the 52 years they had shared. He had been her partner, her love, her best friend. Clara lived another 5 years, dying in 1940 at the age of 80. Her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed as she slipped away, and her last words were of Kane, of their first meeting, of the morning he had broken down a barn door and set her free. They were buried side by side in the San Antonio cemetery, their headstone reading, Kane James Parker and Clara Mae Parker. Beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents, they chose love and built a legacy. But their true legacy was not in stone or land or businesses, though those things endured. Their true legacy was in the children and grandchildren who grew up knowing they had the right to choose their own paths, to love who they wished, to build lives of purpose and meaning. It was in the story passed down through generations, of a young woman locked in a barn and a cowboy brave enough to break her free, and how from that single act of courage an entire family tree had grown. And on quiet nights in San Antonio, when the stars shone bright over Texas, people still sometimes told the story of Clara Morrison and Kane Parker, the barn door that broke at dawn, and the love that bloomed from freedom chosen and cherished.